I'm really pleased to welcome everyone joining here today to a timely series of conversations supporting the UN's Decade of Action. Our world is confronted with a global crisis unlike any other. The COVID-19 pandemic has taken hundreds of thousands of lives, affected billions of people, and risks eroding decades of development progress. The pandemic has highlighted the fragilities of today's world. But even before the crisis hit, it was clear that we were not on track to implement the Sustainable Development Goals by the target date of 2030. The Decade of Action on the SDGs was launched in January of this year with the aim of accelerating progress and turning aspirations into activation. As the pandemic continues to wreak havoc on societies and economies, the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement are the blueprints for a strong, successful recovery. But we can only deliver on them with the rapid, unified, collective contributions of all: governments, private sector, civil society, academia, and more. We need to find innovative ways of bringing these stakeholders together and maximizing their joint potential. I therefore welcome the development of SustainChain by the US Coalition on Sustainability and the Blue Chip Foundation. SustainChain is a technology platform designed to match and support peer-to-peer collaboration on sustainability goals and challenges. It aims to empower sustainability changemakers, unify efforts, and bring together the collective power of sustainability practitioners, innovators, and social investors. We know that systems-based change enabled by the best technology has to offer as a pathway to reaching the level and pace of change that is needed to secure our future. That's why technologies like SustainChain are so exciting to hear about.
Welcome again. Thank you for joining us for this second in a three-part series of talks on accelerating global innovation, sponsored by SustainChain. It's UN General Assembly Week, and we are talking about impact and about meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. So you may wonder why we're hosting a panel dedicated to the fashion industry. And we're doing that because fashion is actually kind of a Trojan horse of impact. It has all of the nasty problems of plastics or batteries or big agriculture, just in a little bit wrapped up in a prettier picture. The production and distribution of clothing and textiles is responsible for dirty water, greenhouse gas, forced labor, waste, microplastics, and it is an enormous economic driver. Last year, the size of the apparel market in the US was estimated to be approximately $368 billion and growing. The textile sector represents 6% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which is also accelerating, and 10 to 20% of pesticide use. Washings, solvents, dyeing used in the ordinary manufacturing of clothing is responsible for an estimated 1/5 of industrial water pollution, and clothing accounts for 20 to 30% of the microplastics flowing into the oceans. Fashion is a rare industry that has remained largely unchanged for the last 150 years, which makes it an innovator's dream. It's a system ripe for disruption, and we are lucky that there are a lot of exciting innovators looking to scale their ideas in ways that will dramatically reduce the impact of fashion. For these innovations to scale, they need two key partnerships: brands and capital. Jacqueline Corbelli from the US Coalition on Sustainability calls this the three-legged stool, and it's what the coalition created SustainChain to address. Our three panelists today represent a success story and the radical collaboration necessary to get a technology from that big idea to a scale where it can be seen in the market. So today I'm thrilled to introduce Stacey Flynn. She is the founder of Evernew, a research and development company that tackles the issue of garment waste. Their new cycle technology turns unwanted cotton garment waste into new premium fiber. We have Paul Dillinger, the head of global product innovation at Levi's. Levi's was Evernew's first early adopter brand partner. And we have Caroline Brown, the managing director of Closed Loop Partners, who was an early investor in Evernew. In Caroline's former life, it is worth noting that she was the CEO of brands like DKNY and Carolina Herrera. Hi, everybody. In yesterday's panel, Gabriella Hurst was saying that these connections are the hardest thing, and that what took her 5 years to achieve could have taken much less time with some of these technologies and tools for connection. But Stacy, when you started Evernew, there weren't tools like SustainChain. You had to connect with brands and early stage financing using your own wherewithal. So can you tell us a little bit of the story of how you came together with Levi's and Closed Loop and got them to partner with you at an early stage?
Yeah, sure. So my business partner, Christo, and I both had, several years of experience in the industry. So we had connections and contacts to leverage, and that really helped us a lot. But, we also knew that if we were going to really make headway with investors, we had to get some proof of concepts with brand retail partners. So, our entry point with Levi's was, we had 3 entry points actually. One of my colleagues referred me for a job. I applied for a job, went through their HR department, got to the hiring manager and pitched Evernew. That was one way we got in. The second was I heard that Paul was speaking at FIT. So I made him a sample by hand, dyed it in indigo, and brought it with me to that event, and found Paul after the event and showed him the sample. Then the next day, I flew to San Francisco, and I knew Paul's colleague was going to be at an event, and met her. And between those 3 events, we got a meeting. But getting a meeting is only the first step. We had lots of meetings, but to find people who are really aligned to the vision and committed to the vision, that's something else. And I don't think we were expecting that from the Levi's team, which was a pleasant surprise. We got our relationship to a point where Paul, authorized us to make the first prototype. And that first prototype allowed us to get financing. So, we were able to bring a Levi's gene to the meeting with Closed Loop, and Closed Loop invested in our company.
Wow. I mean, this is clearly a special relationship that you have all developed. And I love that prior to having any way to access these people, you just described stalking. I mean, a little bit, you had to really find people by going to them. So what does the industry need in order to have more of these success stories like the 3 of you, and to be able to do this faster?
Go ahead, Caroline.
Sorry, I'm not sure who you're asking. I'm happy to jump in. I think the combination of the elements of this triangle are critically important, and it's one of the great assets of SustainChain. We really need, number one, the innovators to create on the level that they are, which is pushing the fashion industry further from a level of innovation and science than we've ever seen. We need investors who are willing to take the risks that can move these innovations from a concept to a lab, to a pilot, and to commercial scale. And we need the corporates who are willing to bring the creativity to the table, to pilot these, to inspire consumers and bring it to the market with credibility and scale. And I think all of this is really held together by the glue of this continued spirit of deep collaboration and openness. One of the things that's exciting about this area of our industry is it is one of the leading areas where we see fashion industries willing to collaborate and willing to share information. And so looking at cementing that triangle is really important for the future for all businesses.
Caroline, it's interesting that you were talking about that collaboration and that transparency. Paul, we hear a lot about greenwashing from a marketing perspective, but I've heard you talk about something we could almost call green blocking, meaning that brands are still in a traditional mindset fashion mindset, wanting exclusivity on things like technology, which inherently keeps them from scaling. How do we get the industry to move past that?
It's an interesting dilemma. I think the fashion industry understands its the creative capital that it thrives on as secrets. Traditional paradigm of the Parisian couture house, that in the middle of the 20th century you had people actually sewing the garments, were sewing through a window in a sheet, so they were never even able to see the entire garment they were sewing on. They were only able to see just the seam they were working on, because the vision for next season's creative expression was considered so precious, and so and its only value was in its position as a secret. That kind of work works when we're talking about a runway presentation, but when fashion brands treat features of sustainability as if they were competitive advantages to be leveraged to incite greater sales, rather than what they're supposed to be, which is, full faith efforts to conserve resources. And when they keep the unlocked secret to make sure that they're saving more water than their competitor, or that they're reducing their carbon footprint over their competitor, they're really misunderstanding the whole point of this. The other powerfully problematic feature of the fashion industry is that it prides itself on being an industry that reinvents itself every season, that you have new expressions of creativity coming down a runway every season. In fact, those expressions of creativity are highly constrained and by a supply chain that is fundamentally unwelcoming of disruption, that it doesn't want to be changed, and that for all the change we pretend to present, we're essentially dealing with a very narrow range of technologies, a very narrow range of fabrics, and all working within, as you mentioned, an industrial context that is quaintly antiquated insofar as the machines we're working on, those technologies were unlocked in the 1830s. The looms we're working on, those technologies were unlocked in the 1850s. And now we're trying to put new materials through both of those machines and expecting no degradation of efficiency, no change in speed to market. And that's insane. It's worth noting that we've got an industry that's so impatient that it wants its non-disruptive innovation to be delivered within 6 months at cost parity, at efficiency parity, at availability parity with the conventional supply chain that's been working in its present form for over 200 years. That's impossible. And we have an industry with a very narrow attention span. But the meeting when Stacey initially started stalking me at that conference at FIT, that was June 3rd, 2015. So this isn't a single season opportunity. This isn't a speed to market opportunity. These new technologies that have to approach this sort of precious supply chain and move objects through smoothly without disruption. The runway to that kind of activity is far greater than a normal fashion cycle, and it requires an industry that's predisposed to 6-month attention spans to suddenly expand its vision and say, what do we need to achieve over the next 5 years? Because with Stacey, we started working on that first prototype jean 5 years ago.
I think that's really interesting, Paul, the way you're talking about that kind of true partnership. And it's interesting because 5 years for an innovation in fashion is actually a short time traditionally, because as you said, we've had almost none. Stacey, I think one of the reasons you've been able to be so successful with Evernew and getting it to market and having it that way is because you brought your brands together, your brand partners together in radical transparency. Can you tell the story of the Seattle meeting? Because I don't know any other innovator who's done this, and I think it's interesting and special.
Yeah, I mean, we're aggressive because we're really trying to move the needle by 2030 on meta level impact reduction to global air, water, soil, trees, and we're trying to eliminate waste in the apparel industry. That's our goal, and that's why we're so aggressive. One of the things, when I pitched the concept of bringing all of our early adopters under one roof, Christo said this feels really dangerous. It feels like bringing all your ex-girlfriends into one room at one time. This could go really badly. And I said, you know, it could, or it could be the best thing that ever happened to our company. So we invited the Stella McCartney team, Levi's team, and the Adidas team, and we did not have Target come in at the time because, you know, even a small order from Target is a massive order to the world. So, you know, we wanted to make sure that we were being realistic in our goals. So we asked our 3 early adopters who, for all intents and purposes, are not direct competitors. We asked them to support us with an early stage purchase order so that we could demonstrate to the supply chain that we had something that the brands and retailers were interested in commercializing. And then from there, we were able to focus, you know, the majority of our attention on the supply chain to get them up and running.
We kind of, speaking on the supply chain, we all kind of watched as the global pandemic broke out, and it completely ground the fashion supply chain to a halt. And everybody said, oh, wow, the supply chain is broken. The pandemic broke it. I would argue that fashion had an extremely fragile supply chain to begin with, but people were still making money, so nobody bothered to fix it. And I think it goes back to what Paul was saying in terms of no innovation for the last 150 years. Caroline, I'd love for you to talk about this, because one of closed loop partners, Fortes, is finding and investing in those missing or broken pieces of the circular economy supply chain. So in your view, what investment in the fashion supply chain is needed to accelerate that progress toward achieving the SDGs?
Sure. Well, I first would just comment on, you know, sort of the exposure to the lack of resilience in the supply chain and the fragility of the system that came to light during COVID, really moving it from an insider view to a consumer-facing lens. And this is incredibly important and impactful because it influences companies, it influences investors, it also influences consumer behavior. If you're in the industry, as all of us are, we've seen with an inside lens the challenges for many years, but it hasn't always been exposed to the public quite in that way. So I would say right now, you know, the good news from an investor lens is that there are capital needs everywhere, and there's no shortage of great opportunities. I mean, we're looking at a multi-trillion-dollar industry in need and with the opportunity of a major, fantastic, innovative transformation. So lots of opportunities to be had. When we look across the supply chain, we focus on about 8 different categories, starting as early as ideation, leading to merchandising, material science, transparency tools, clean manufacturing, recapture, renew, re-commerce, and recycling of product. And I would say amongst those, there are opportunities within each one. We also look at B2C companies who have really unique business models based on circularity or sustainability. What I think right now, you know, it's impossible not to be excited about material science and chemical recycling and the innovations that, you know, Evernew is in as an example. I also think that, you know, one of the unrecognized areas is the unglamorous area that happens at the bookends of the process. So the technologies that enable some of the 3D processes that digitize the relationship between design, merchandising, and manufacturing are really critical to taking out a lot of unseen waste that happens with very early decisions in the process. And also on the other end of the process, the entire area of recapture. You know, there's a big opportunity for businesses to figure out, you know, how we can get this product from consumers' wardrobes to the right place to be recycled, resold, or reused, rather than ending in landfill. And so that missing link, that bridge of recapture, we see as a critical growth opportunity for the future.
Paul, Levi's has some pretty aggressive goals to diversify your materials mix and to go for more sustainable technologies. What are some of the innovations that you are hoping to see scale quickly?
Well, the recovered cotton, regenerated, the marginal decrease in impact that we see from nuanced recalibration of conventional cotton cultivation, it's nothing compared to just don't make that gene. Make that gene out of an old gene. Like the quickest way to is zero, is not dialing it down, but just not counting. So I think we need opportunities like this where we're recovering and activating the industry waste and turning it into an alternative to virgin materials. There are opportunities in virgin materials that I think have gone underleveraged, and we've been very strong proponents in the last 2 years of hemp as a solution, not the hemp that we know, but versions of cottonized hemp, where the fiber processing has been managed in a way that we're producing a fiber that can move through the apparel supply chain with relative efficiency and relative cost parity and with tremendous conservation value. But I think it's important that we highlight that in context of opportunities like Avenue, so that we're dealing with the value of a natural cycle that's been optimized and with intention to minimize impact on the environment. We're dealing with technical cycles that have been invented to resolve problems of our own making that desperately need to be resolved. And I don't think there's a silver bullet. I think all of these opportunities need to be pursued, and they take time. The work we've been doing with hemp has taken just as long as the work we've been doing on the post-consumer man-made cellulosics, but it's really exciting to see it being brought to scale. But most important, I think, is bringing a design intention into the studio to be managing all these products with awareness of the complexity of recovery and awareness of the complexity of end-of-life resolution, and to be designing with circularity as a goal is a very different and difficult proposition. It's not the problem that most designers think that they need to solve when they go into their job in the morning, but designing out all of the pollutants. What makes aluminum or glass or paper recycling so much more efficient is you're dealing with a monomaterial object. You're dealing with one material component in one object. Have you ever looked at the composition tags in the back of the sweater of yours? You could have like 5 different fibers, 3 different goats get referenced on that, right? It's the complexity of the material assembly is the problem, and building the new capabilities into a culture of design that anticipates the need to resolve the object at the end of its life, rather than just focusing on all the ways that the object is different than it was last season. I think those are important mind shifts that have to happen. And then there's technology to back them all up now, which is exciting.
Yeah, so Stacey, I've got a question for you, because so in your journey, there was the idea of getting to the brands, getting to the capital. And, obviously we're here because of SustainChain, who's helping kind of like, from a tech perspective, make that a reality for people. But then, so let's go to the next thing. Is there a role here for the consumer? How do you get to a consumer to have them know to ask for better? I think all 3 of you can comment on this. Stacey, maybe you first.
Yeah, I think before we get to the consumer, we've got to have the supply chain embrace new ideas, which is not an easy thing to do. I think we've alluded to the fact that, the supply chains, the further back you go into the supply chain, the lower margin those businesses generally are. There's a general fear of innovation because they've been doing the same thing for a really long time. So to inspire someone to change after they've been doing something for 50 to 100 plus years in a certain way is a colossal challenge. If that cannot happen, then we can't even get to consumers. We can trick it and get to consumers in smaller ways, but if we want to scale this, we really do need to figure out a way to get the supply chain lined up so that they can scale early stage technologies.
Will you give we've framed that up for people, because I think, as Caroline said, we're all kind of an internal lens on the fashion industry and the supply chain. Can you talk about the CapEx investment required to do something different? Because it's staggering.
So there is no CapEx investment. They want a plug and play solution in most cases. So, we've had to design our solutions to fit into existing systems as an entry point. That's not the end game. We've got, radical solutions that completely change the way we produce and depolymerize textiles and turn them into new fibers. But, when we started talking to the supply chain, they said, CapEx investment is not our path of least resistance. If you can decouple your solvent technologies from your pulp technologies and show us that you can take our existing solvents and feed them with 100% waste and create higher quality fiber for price parity, then we'd have something to talk about. So we did that. We're not at price parity, obviously, because we're not at scale, but we did decouple our technology to get them interested. And now we're in the process of running trials, commercial trials. And our goal really is, if we're going to make a dent and really impact global air, water, soil, and trees, this has to be done at scale. And that's really the goal.
Caroline, how do we get that done at scale? How do, closed loop is making amazing investments, but you alone are not going to be able to fund the transformation. What does it take from that blended capital perspective?
Well, I would say that number one is businesses are understanding more and more the financial benefits behind running a circular business model and aligning to a clearly expressed consumer value set of sustainability. So, number one, if you look at some of the benefits there, we spend a lot of money as an industry mining raw materials that just get thrown away at the end of first use. What impact does it have for a company and for an industry when you can recapture those raw materials and put them back into your supply chain? What is the value? We know it is high, of being able to reconnect with your customers throughout the entire course of product life cycle. And we know what the normal attrition rates are in apparel, which are fairly high, and we see a massive reduction and increase in consumer loyalty when you can continue the dialogue. The other element that is incredibly valuable for businesses, and Paul's comment about the three goats, which I just love, touches on this a little bit, is the richness of the storytelling opportunity. And I think fashion has a great opportunity to meet the level of some other industries that have really embraced product heritage, product provenance, and product story to inspire consumers in a new way. So I would say that, number one is, we're very encouraged by the knowledge that we see from large corporations now looking and saying, listen, we're leaving financial opportunity on the table here to strengthen our business. It's not an easy transformation, but when we get there, we will have these assets that we will benefit from. I would also say that, I love Stacey's comment about behavior change within the supply chain, and I think it's as important from a consumer lens as well. I think the consumer has a very, very important voice in this whole equation. Number one, express consumer values are the driver of change in many ways. Consumers are able to vote with their credit cards every single time they make a purchase. And we have trained consumers as an industry over the last 15 years that clothing can be a disposable item. That's a new mindset. It was not always like that. And we need consumers to look at apparel and to recognize the value that is in these products and the value for reuse and the value for longer life, rather than putting it into a category of disposable product. So all of these variables are important. And I think you sort of can't decouple the influence that all of them have on the success of this process.
Paul, you said something really interesting the other day that I'd love for you to expand on here, which was that it was maybe about the role of brands, and that a lot of the times brands are waiting for a customer signal to do the right thing. Will you talk about that?
Yeah, we're waiting for the demand signal to come through, and thinking that the demand signal is going to say, I don't want to bargain. A demand signal that says, I'd like to pay a little bit more for something. No, the demand signal will continue to be one that seeks lower prices, and that's fair. Unfortunately, the apparel industry right now is set up to respond with the supply to whatever demand signal comes its way. So there is a degree that the consumer can be involved, and should be involved. And I would love to live in a future of conscious consumption where we don't get demand signal for an ever cheaper 3-pack of t-shirts, like reducing the value of the garment that you're buying to $2. When you know that the cost of that garment is much higher, and certainly its utility can't really be measured. I think that expecting brands to suddenly put themselves at competitive disadvantage by rejecting legitimate consumer demand and only offering enlightened supply is also a little problematic. And so I think there's another important player to kind of referee this particular game, That's why we're here talking. Where is policy and governance in this? Why aren't benefit fibers given preferential, given a preferential trade construct? Why will it still be? Why will Evernew still be handled as a conventional man-made cellulosic when it comes in? Why can't it be handled as something special? Why isn't there some value assigned to all of this work in the macroeconomic construct? Where are the private-public partnerships that are helping build the recycling infrastructure we need to activate all of this waste that's being thrown out? Why are we leaving it to basically we've got two kids fighting a little bit. One wants something, the other wants to supply something else. Where's the referee? Where's the parent in all this? And I don't mean to defer to government as the parent. I think that's a dangerous metaphor that I just laid out there. Never mind, let me take it back. But I think really this is another three-legged stool, and right now we're missing a leg, so we keep falling over. Whereas we need consumer, we need supplier, we need governance.
Whew. I think you get. We are all definitely in agreement with you there, I think. One question just came in that I think is interesting, that is big tobacco getting sued and being held liable for their position in consumer smoking. Do we think that there is a world in which fashion brands will be held liable for their participation in knowingly polluting? We have so much data. Do we think that is something that will ever happen? Or will it happen too late?
I think you're touching on the greatest fear any brand or retailer has.
Right. But the logical extension of that thinking says that, well, once a marketing campaign this goes out there that correctly identifies each denim purchase, for example, each pair of jeans as being 3,781 liters of fresh water per unit over the life of the garment, why on earth was that consumer given the right to buy 2, to buy 3, to buy 4? There's certainly plenty of culpability to be spread around. The brands hold some of it, but my God, have you seen your closets? Maybe 1.8%, like almost 2 times larger than they were 20 years ago, but 10 times more stuffed. I think as much responsibility as may lie with the businesses operating, and in truth, there's a shield of ignorance that the very murky, deep, complex supply chain gives all of us. It would be great to have that be fully exposed, but at that point in time, damn it, we would expect that the consumer would respond a little more responsibly than the grazing that is done at the mall right now, right? The shopping as entertainment that is done, the shopping on our phones as if we're playing a video game, right? There's a lot of responsibility that can be spread kind of equally across this across the parties in this dilemma. I think what's more important is to incentivize better behavior by creating economic opportunity for the delivery of fully circular product that is viable for recovery. There should be preferential import duty on that sort of stuff. There should be incentives to recover garments, and that those incentives shouldn't be managed by single brands. I don't expect anyone to take their empty soda bottles back to Pepsi and their empty Coke cans back to Coca-Cola. No, we have an infrastructure that collects them and manages them correctly. And I think it's easy for me to bash the consumer. It's easy for the consumers to bash the brands. But really, this is a circular firing squad if we want to talk about responsibility.
So Caroline, can you talk about some of we're talking about closed loop's real area here in terms of that you were born out of a recycling mindset and the potentials of the circular economy. So can you tell us kind of what's coming there? Like how can I take this shirt when I'm done with it and make sure that it gets sent into an Evernew recycling technology?
Well, a couple of things. That goes back to one of my earlier points about our interest in the bookends of the process. and, you know, looking at sort of the recapture mechanisms that need to be put in place to get your shirt carry from you to an ever new process. And those are, as I said, they're not glamorous parts of the business. They're cumbersome, but they are extraordinarily critical, because without it, you can't close the loop on circularity. The other thing that I would add is that, you know, Paul's comment about transparency is really important, and the opaqueness of the supply chain, the opaqueness of the product life cycle in apparel after it leaves the consumer home makes it extremely hard to hold companies or individuals accountable. But the conversation of accountability is already in play. And we see it happening in different parts of the world. And I would say that Europe is leading that discussion. But the conversation about, you know, what would this feel like? What would this business model look like with extended producer responsibilities dramatically changes the margin equation on many of these companies. And we see smart companies who are really looking to solve for that before it becomes an issue, you know, and who proactively are saying, we know that maybe it's in a year or 5 years or 10 years, whatever it is, we know it's coming at some point. And let's be proactive and take the right steps now, both for the good of our business, the environment, and also to protect ourselves when those regulations come into play.
So let's try to focus on some solutions, because I think we're hitting on a lot of like the big issues that the four of us spend a lot our whole days dealing with, really. Stacey, I'm seeing a lot of other innovators in the chat and in the Q&A. What's your advice? One of the things I think you just said was like, one of your pathways to success was that you had to actually not abandon your original idea, but make your original idea fit to the current infrastructure in order to make this go smoothly and quickly. But like, what's your other advice to other innovators? How do they find their Paul and their Caroline?
Yeah, I mean, it's I actually think, you know, this is one of the greatest design challenges of our century. How do we crack this code? So I find blame and shame and, you know, focusing on policy or reprimanding is not really, you know, being part of the inspiration behind why we're actually doing this. So, you know, I would say that, you know, one of the things that I talk to a lot of early stage innovators, and, you know, one of the things that I don't think that innovators really understand when they're first starting out is that you may have visibility to a problem or a solution to a problem that other people can't see. I think a lot of times we assume that things are obvious and they're not. So, you know, that's really what we're talking about here is, you know, when we look at a system, every single person in the supply chain has visibility to a different part of the system. We do a lot of arguing over perspective. This is what I see, so it must be true for all. And the reality is that it's just what you can see. So when it comes to innovation, you know, and really being bullish about here is the problem I see, here's the solution that I'm proposing, and inspiring your stakeholders to join forces. Now, this is not an easy thing because, you know, I always say that, you know, our number one qualification for any partner is we need someone who's enthusiastic about the vision, someone who's enthusiastic and deeply aligned to using their human energy to solving the problem. Without that, you know, there are a million reasons not to do something, and they are pointed out thoroughly and completely along the way. But if we're aligned to the one reason why we should do something, that's your ground, that's what you hold on to, that's what you stay focused on with your partners, and that's what gets things done.
Paul, what about you? What's your advice? Other brands, you have done an amazing job at Levi's of bringing in innovation even when it has been uncomfortable. What's your advice there? What can people do? What can brands do?
You know, it's an unfortunate dilemma that the best tool that we have to solving any of these problems or to proving and validating the solutions is the same tool that causes the problem. So how do we, I think another way of framing what Stacey's describing is how do we turn the supply chain as it is into a tool for innovation and to make it be the thing that unlocks the challenge. What I found is that the best way to do that is to build within your business some mechanism to generate false, intentional demand signals for products that may be inefficient, slow, and expensive, but bring the demand signal out, get the business to get to the supply chain to working on the problem. And for us, that is taking the form of a small collection called Well Thread. It's where we put all of our biggest challenges and we by hook or by crook, we generate a seasonal unit order for the product we've designed in this little area. And only by doing so does that unit order then turn on the full creative capability of this big machine to go about solving the problem. So long as the problem remains isolated in a laboratory, its solution will only ever be laboratory scale. And only by bringing it into the actual supply chain, you get at least that first season of validation. Oh shit, it can be done. Oh my gosh, we can actually deliver the product. Yes, it may have been eroded margin and a little slower than you'd like, but it can be. And then you've got your proofs of concept where you can then show them to the business and say, well, wouldn't this be nice if it were suddenly, if the good that it did at 1,000 units could suddenly be the great that it can deliver at 100,000. There has to be a way of protecting the work and creating this intentional demand signal that gets the business working on its own solutions, because otherwise it's far too easy to just relegate the solution to the lab or to the innovation team or to as an experiment. The concept car is it's a real flashy, feature at any auto show, but you don't see many of them on the road. And for the solution to be a solution, we have to see these clothes on everybody. So I think figuring out how to generate your intentional demand to spark the activity of that supply chain, I think that's the key for us.
Caroline, we seem to have some early stage innovators and some early stage designers trying to work in a circular way. So I'm gonna ask you, what's your best advice to them? How do they get themselves ready to come and find someone like Closed Loop or somebody who is an early stage investor in a circular concept? What's your best advice there?
So, we joke about, Stacey's behavior is stalking. We just call it persistence. And I think most startup CEOs have that characteristic in spades, and it serves them very well. It's our job as investors to see as much as we can in the market. And I think that, remembering that we're always happy to have companies reach out to us blind. It literally happens multiple times a day. So not to be shy about there's a company that you like, an investor that you like, that you think shares your ethos, reach out to them. This happens to us all the time. We find great opportunities in this way. And really, it's our job to see as much as possible and to funnel that down to the best opportunities. I would also say, stick with it, because this is a time that as you're entering in circularity, it's a moment of change, and it's an incredibly exciting time where the industry is embracing this. So stick through this bridge moment that we have between where we are today and where we're going to be in the future, because this is the economic model of this industry in the future. So those would be two of the important things that I would call out. And then the last thing I would say is, just obvious, network with every single person because even as an example of the triangle we talk about here, you're going to need more than an investor. You have an investor, great. Now you need a partner to pilot with. Now you need someone to scale. Now you need to make friends with the factory. So, really building your network in a 360 view is critically important to the growth and success of early stage businesses.
Amazing. And then, I'm interested from all of you, are there tools, are there organizations, are there things that you would point? I'm really interested in this being useful to the people we're up here speaking to each other, which I love to do, but there's lots of people listening. Any other tools that you guys can think of? I mean, obviously we're here thanks to SustainChain, who are helping bring people together and creating a natural sort of vetting process. I always say it's sort of like LinkedIn and Crunchbase had a sustainability baby. What else is out there? What is there? Are there other things? Are there other resources?
Yeah, I mean, Sustainable Apparel Coalition, Textile Exchange, these folks are on, they're convening the supply chain. They have very closed circuit conversations, with large brands and retailers. I think that they've got to start inviting innovators into these conversations. So that we can help figure out if we've got solutions that can be redesigned to solve specific problems brands and retailers have. I think that, one of the things that, as Paul was mentioning, it's going to take, the entire supply chain to come together and recognize this as being a great innovation opportunity. Pretty much everyone on our team we consider to be, spending the first half of their careers causing the problem thoroughly and completely. And now we're going back through and we're redesigning specific nodes in the supply chain because we have intimate understanding of how that was originally designed, because we helped originally design it. So, I think that the more people like Sustainable Apparel Coalition, Textile Exchange, these NGOs are really important to open up to innovation participation.
I just, when I described this event to my friends on Facebook, as I invited them, I said, please come hear me yell at you about a problem that I created.
Yeah, we're all
let me yell at you to clean up the mess that I helped you make. Like
totally.
That's work that's being done.
But this is not how the story ends, Paul.
This is just the middle of the story.
Of course not. No.
Yeah, this is the middle.
It's the middle. I think also, Carrie, that early stage businesses can benefit from a lot of the great incubators, a lot of the incubators that are coming out of universities, design schools, industrial programs. We work a lot with early stage incubators to look at concepts that they've been developing. And it's a great for a pre-seed or a seed venture investment. It's a great way to get your company in front of a large group of investors.
That's a great point, Caroline. The first 3 years of our company formation, I was in grad school and I applied for every single early stage business case competition I could get in front of. And that's partially how we financed the first 3 years. And it put us in touch with a lot of people. Even if we didn't win the competition, there were a lot of people to collaborate with and network with. Absolutely.
And it raises another good point about being creative about the type of capital and, looking for
non-dilutive.
Yeah. And yes. And not just a one size fits all. So there's certain stage of businesses that these grants can really be amazing in the very early stage. And a lot of the incubators and a lot of the educational centers are doing some really interesting work with it. We've seen some great entrepreneurs that have been able to bootstrap, very far before taking in diluted capital by taking advantage of those programs.
Stacey, you participated in some of this. Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think, one of the things that, is really interesting too, is when you're first starting a company, you don't even really know how to set up your cap table or how you set up your financing structure. We parted with a significant, close to half of our company for the initial $2.5 million. Had we known early on that we would, that was probably a bad idea, we would have done something differently. So we actually had to wait until our valuation was at a certain point so that we were able to, retain some of the ownership ourselves. But these are things that early stage companies absolutely need guidance around. So if there are any early stage companies listening, sit down with a VC and talk to them about what they would like to see. Sit down with other entrepreneurs and talk to them about what they've done, what they wished they had done differently, and learn about how you want to go out and structure your company.
So we're running out of time, but I just got the best question of the day, which is down with competition in the fashion industry. How do we change the brand mindset to be more like the tech industry? And I think that I'm taking that to mean more speed, everybody makes money. What can we take from the tech industry?
mastery of disinformation. I don't know.
I mean, honestly, if people really understood it took to actually deliver apparel to retail, you know, there are so many variables and so many things that could and do go wrong. There's never a product that's delivered to you that hasn't had a colossal issue in some way that's overcome by 100 technical people. It's not as easy the way it's currently designed. So it's ripe for disruption. The whole thing needs to be redesigned over the next 10 years.
Well, we're so glad that the three of you are part of that redesign. I'm going to ask one more question because, you know, we have an audience that no matter who they are or what they do for a living, I'm assuming they're all wearing clothes, probably. So they're all consumers. We all buy things. Are there, knowing what you know, what's your best advice to somebody who is watching this to change their habits or something that they can do as a citizen to help improve this?
Carrie, I'll start there. I think number one, just ask questions. Transparency is a core part of our culture today, and I'm amazed at the sophistication of, you know, all consumers and really looking under the hood of these businesses and ensuring that those companies are value aligned to what's important to them. And I think consumers are living in a fantastic moment where they have the curiosity to know that the IoT and blockchain technologies that can enable that type of visibility at the consumer level. And so ask questions, be curious, and, you know, and ask to understand the values of the company and make sure that you're voting correctly with your wallet according to what you believe in as a consumer.
What about you, Paul?
Yeah, I think we still struggle with the unlock of the appropriate consumer engagement, consumer communication, how to embed identity into the garment so that it's right there at the consumer's fingertips so they can understand immediately what were the manufacturing conditions, the labor conditions, the material procurement conditions, and all the various features that would go into informing an enlightened purchase. Right now, the way the garment's labeled, it's labeled, coming through customs, coming into the system. There's no labeling or communication treatment that handles its exit from the system to optimize activation. So we're really not giving the consumers as good a picture of the whole context of the garment. So my advice would simply be this: if there's something that you find that you want to buy, don't buy it. Put it out of your mind, and maybe you're having dinner and think, are you thinking about that thing you didn't buy today? As you're falling asleep, are you imagining the outfits that you could have made with that thing that you didn't buy today? And when you wake up the next morning, do you remember what it was? What were the attributes that you liked about it? What did it feel like? Describe the color. Like if it's not something that's sufficiently meaningful and important that you can describe it accurately the next morning, which many of the things we bought do not fall in that category, you shouldn't be buying it. Like, you only let into your house things that you're going to be wanting. Like, let friends into your house, and a lot of these things we buy, they're not our friends, right? They're an impulse purchase. It's that they're like the friend version of the drunk conversation you had with that girl in the bathroom, right? You don't need it. And so I think just being mindful and cautious about who you invite into your home, because a lot of the things we invite into our home are frankly toxic. So let's just be put a lot harder at it. Tell the brands, convince me, help make the argument. Don't just go grazing in the mall and picking up any old thing. Really, really filter what we let into our lives, because we spent the last 6 months at home staring at all this shit we shouldn't have bought in the first place. I think we have a lot of regret in our wallets right now, and I think better purchase decisions could go a long way in helping this industry.
Absolutely. Stacey, what about you?
Yeah, I agree. I think that, consumer spending, the things that you purchase, make sure you're making the right purchases, make sure you're wearing the clothes that you choose to buy, and ask your brands and retailers if they recycle, where you can recycle. The more that we ask questions, the more it's going to inspire change, because it does require them to go back to their business and say, hey, we've got a customer who's asking us if we can recycle this, can we? And then, you know, it seems so simple, but those are the kinds of things that we need consumers to do. And, you know, totally, Paul, Caroline have already said, make sure the things you buy are things that you're going to commit to, you're going to wear. You know, see if there's a way that you can get your, you know, updated look from, you know, a friend, or resurrect some things that you've had to have in the back of your closet that you haven't worn in a while. But really ask yourself the question, do I really need this? Is this something I want to take responsibility for? Because that's really where the world is going.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. We're just about out of time. But on behalf of the U.S. Coalition on Sustainability, I want to thank all three of our amazing panelists. You can connect to them on SustainChain. There was a lot of people asking how they get in touch with you three. SustainChain is not just a platform for fashion. I want to make sure everybody understands that. Whatever industry you are in, the platform can connect you to counterparts who can help you accelerate your progress toward the SDGs. I want to thank our fearless leader, Jacqueline Corbelli from the U.S. Coalition on Sustainability, our inspiring champion, Amina Mohammed, and the Blue Chip Foundation for their support. Tomorrow, please join us at the same time when we're going to speak to actually some of the NGOs that were highlighted today about their policy architecting and about how to use technology to break down silos and create connected action. So we hope we'll see you back here tomorrow. This talk and all of the talks this week will be on YouTube. Thank you so much.